And the last talk in this section is from Dr. Frank Willett. Thank you very much for participating. Dr. Willett is a research scientist here at the prominent Neuroprosthesis Translational Laboratory, where he's working on brain-computer interfaces in motor neuroscience, broadly interested in computational approaches to understanding brain function and recordings. So we're interested in hearing from Dr. Willett.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you for having me. And I'm excited to talk with you guys about our recent work on restoring communication with a speech neuroprosthesis. So I just want to start by framing the clinical need, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but this is a very famous example of a person who was locked in, Jean-Dominique Bauby, who had a brainstem stroke. He was a former editor of Elle, and he famously became locked in and wrote a whole book about his experience, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And the way he wrote that book was through this single letter spelling. So, his assistant would go through the letters of the alphabet and he would move his eyes to indicate what letter he wanted to select. And this is what he said about his experience. He said that my communication system disqualifies repartee. The keenest rapier grows dull and falls flat when it takes several minutes to thrust it home. It deprives conversation of its sparkle, all those gems you bat back and forth like a ball. So the method we've been using to try to help people like this, to try to help them communicate more quickly and more naturally, is brain-computer interfaces. And in particular, in our lab, we work on intracortical brain-computer interfaces, which means there's an implanted device that records neural activity directly from the cortex, single neuron activity. And it's very tiny, and it consists of these little electrodes that penetrate directly into the cortex and record single neurons. So we get a collection of neurons from the brain in different areas of motor cortex. And we're able to pass that through a decoding function that tries to interpret what the person's trying to do, like how they're trying to move their arm or hand or what they're trying to say. And we can then pass that through different devices to allow them to, for example, control a robotic arm, control a computer, or even speak. And so I want to show, to start things off, just a video from our work about 10 years ago now, not a speech-based one, but a hand-based device that allowed someone with ALS to control a computer cursor just through thought alone. And this is, one of the earliest examples of what we were doing. And here you can see her typing what she wants to say one letter at a time on the screen. So this is just full neural control. And yeah, it worked great. This is something we were really excited about, but as you can see, it's quite slow, and there's other devices kind of like this that also can restore slow communication, like eye tracking and so on. And so we were really interested in whether we could speed this up. So yeah, just to put the speed into context, communication with letter boards like Jean-Dominique Bauby might be around 4 to 5 words per minute at most. Handwriting is around 20 words per minute, just normal handwriting. Typing on a keyboard, the average typist can type 50 words per minute. And then, speech is around 120 to 160 words per minute. So that brain-computer interface I just showed you there from 2017 was around 8 words per minute. So still amazing, but it's not going to restore kind of natural communication. We did some work to try to improve this. We did one based on handwriting, which went around to 18 words per minute, but still, we wanted to go further, and an obvious direction is speech. If we could make a brain-computer interface based around somebody trying to speak and make speaking movements, maybe we could restore a natural conversation to someone who would otherwise, be locked in or near locked in and not have a way to participate in a normal conversation, in a natural way. So this work we did a couple of years ago now on a brain-computer interface for speech. So this was, a single case study of a single person in our BrainGate 2 pilot clinical trial, and this person had ALS and could no longer speak intelligibly, and we placed 4 microelectrode arrays in speech-related areas of the brain, so 2 in speech motor cortex and then 2 in Broca's area. And we took that neural activity and we had a decoding algorithm, using machine learning to figure out what they were trying to say from their brain activity, and then we were able to type that out on the screen and speak that. So the first major question was, when you do this in someone who can't speak anymore, does the neural activity still represent speech? Like, are we still going to be able to get useful information about what they're trying to say if they haven't spoken in many years? And the answer to that was very encouraging. Yes, we found right away that when we asked a person to say one of 50 words, we could decode very clearly from the neural activity which one of those 50 words it was. So this is showing some, our earliest data showing 94% accuracy to distinguish between 50 words that we asked them to try to say. From speech motor cortex. And kind of an interesting side point is we also tried this in Broca's area arrays, and we found no tuning to speech. So that was kind of a surprise to us that Broca's area, famously theorized to be related to speech, and this person could not contain useful information about speech. So kind of all of our information came from the arrays we placed in motor cortex. And then, we also wanted to probe deeper to see, okay, well, does the information about speech still in this person's brain, was it, structured in a way that was kind of what you would expect? Did it have an articulatory structure to it that was preserved rather than just kind of random or unstructured information that was still information, but maybe not. Maybe it had degraded because the person had not spoken for a long time. And this is kind of technical, but basically we found that, yeah, the neural activity looked very similar to the muscle motions that were required to make it. So even though she couldn't speak anymore and intelligibly, the neural activity still reflected the muscle motions that go into the speech she was trying to make. So that was also encouraging that that was still preserved. And then we were like, great, now we want to make a brain-computer interface with it. So the main challenge there is to, be able to make an algorithm that can look at all that neural activity when somebody is trying to say something and figure out exactly what are the words in there, what are the sounds that they're trying to make. And, to do that, we basically took neural features and used machine learning to kind of infer what phonemes were happening at each moment in time, meaning what speech sounds the person was trying to make. And then we used a language model to kind of take a guess at, okay, if those are the speech sounds, then what are the words? And then when we had the words, we could display them on the screen, or we could use text-to-speech to restore communication. So, and it's basically just, I know it's kind of technical, but it's basically pattern recognition. It's like, if you have enough data, collect enough data of them, instructed examples of them, okay, say this sentence, now say this sentence, now say this sentence, collect enough data of that, and then you have enough examples of, okay, when they're trying to say this sound, that generates this kind of pattern, and when they're trying to say this other sounds, it's this type of pattern, and we put that together into a machine learning model. And okay, so now I want to show you some videos of what this system looks like. So the primary way we evaluated its accuracy was to display on the screen a sentence to tell her to try and say, and then she would say it, and then on the bottom of the screen, you're going to see our brain-computer interface kind of deciphering word for word what she's trying to say. And then because we know what she's trying to say, then we can compute how accurate it is, basically. And I think if there's sound, you'll hear her voice. It's as she tries to speak, she'll make vocalizations that are not intelligible.
I don't want to call her a babysitter.
So she has to say that would be good.
That would be good.
And it detects that and is able to put that on the screen and say that.
I did well in school.
So that was very exciting for us. And she could also use it to express her own thoughts. So here we're doing, example question and answer session. So we asked her here, what are you proud of? And you'll hear what she has to say.
I am a very good friend and sister.
So she says she's a very good friend and sister. And finally, it was also encouraging that this was able to work even without vocalization. So it's a little distracting for her to try to vocalize. So we thought, okay, if you just mouth the words, if you just try to mouth the words, can we still decode it? And it still worked. So this is her.
An upper or the company or something.
Yeah, so this is her silently trying to mouth the words, and we're still able to pick up what she's trying to say.
If that's not have any differing relative.
So yeah, so that was super exciting for us that this was even feasible at all. And so then we're able to take this data and quantify how accurate was it, how fast was it. So on the right, we're showing words per minute. So it's about 60 words per minute. So still not, the 100+ words per minute of natural speech, but much faster than any other device for somebody who's locked in or near locked in. And then we're also able to examine the accuracy. So the word error rates for like full general English was about 20 to 25%. So 1 out of every 4 words were wrong. So that's still a lot. That's still not where you'd want to be, but it's very encouraging for a first try. And around that same time, this was also shown concurrently by a separate research group using a different neural recording device that found similar kind of accuracies and performance, which to us was great. So it seems like it's a feasible thing that can work. And there was a few really good things about this that kind of projected that things could get even better. So one thing we found was that as we added more electrodes into our neural decoder, performance seemed to increase with the number of electrodes. So this kind of showed us that, well, maybe if we implanted more electrodes, things would just be better because we're getting more information, we're getting more signal about what the person wants to say. And the other thing we found was that, okay, we didn't use the best decoding algorithms possible. So we went back and reanalyzed our data with different language models, more advanced AI models, and the error rates improved. So it was like, okay, things could probably be better. So very recently, our collaborators at UC Davis kind of took this and improved it, right? So they doubled the electrode count. So they placed 4 arrays in motor cortex instead of 2. And they also improved the real-time language model, so better algorithms. And they were able to encouragingly get even better results. So this is the word error rate over time for the first few sessions. So some of the sessions even had a less than 1% word error rate. So less than 1 in 100 words were wrong. So they're able to get very high accuracy. And it actually works so well that the participant actually uses it for 8+ hours a day now to talk to their family, and they're able to use it for work, and it's their preferred method of communication. So that for us was like a big win. And I just want you to show you an example of him using it. So here he's being interviewed about his experience, and he's using the brain-computer interface to talk about it. So let me play this. It's really cool. So I'll just read it. So he's saying with the brain-computer interface that one of the things that people with my disease suffer from is isolation and depression because they do not feel like they matter anymore, and something like this technology will help bring people back to life and into society. So I think it's really cool that he's able to express complex thoughts like this in a natural conversation using the brain-computer interface. So just to conclude, what did I show you? So one, that neural representations of speech are still preserved in people with ALS. So that was like a necessary thing for this to even work, is that if they can't speak anymore, does the brain still represent that speech accurately? And it still does. And hopefully convince you that speech BCIs really do have a viable potential to restore fast and accurate communication. And future work, of course, we want to make it better. We want to increase the speed even more, hopefully, so that they're able to achieve more natural conversational speeds. And we also want to explore areas beyond motor cortex, because we think that might help it be more accurate and faster. We tried with Broca's area, it didn't succeed, but I think there's other areas of the brain that will be more useful. So I just want to thank my lab and everybody in it who did this amazing work. And of course, our BrainGate Consortium. So this is part of the BrainGate clinical trials, and we're still actively recruiting and trying to find more participants who would be interested in doing this and replicating this work. And that's it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for an amazing talk. It was like seeing the future, but it's here. I'm just thinking, how does this, like, what is the procedure for an individual patient? Like, if it's for me, do you basically give me thousands of words, you record me thinking about those thousands of words, then you train like a deep learning algorithm or classifier on those words, and then when I use those words again in the future, basically, then you can detect them. Like I imagine it's individualized for each patient because the word representation is quite different from me to John to so on, or
Yeah, that's right. So there's definitely a training procedure you have to go through, and we're working to like make that as short and fast as possible. But there's always going to be some, and the training procedure, like you said, is you collect data where you tell a person to say this sentence, this sentence, and then you get a bunch of that data, and then you use a deep learning algorithm. It doesn't have to be the same words because it's getting at the underlying speech sound representation, so you don't have to record every word you might want to say, but you do have to get at least a few hundred sentences so that it has a good enough idea.
And it's specific per patient, I guess.
Yes, that's
because
right.
Our individual representation of language are slightly.
Well, not only that, but also when you implant a device in a new person, you're going to get different neurons, and you have to know what do those neurons do.
Huh.
So that's really an amazing talk. Very, very impressive. I was wondering, I assume these patients with ALS all had prior expressive language. Have you tried this or thought about what it might be like to do this in patients that have no expressive language history and same area of the brain?
Yeah, definitely something we're thinking about. I think it's super interesting. I'd love to expand it to different patients. I think one thing to consider is if you've never spoken, your motor cortex probably doesn't represent speech, but I think there's other areas of the brain that do likely represent what you want to say, and we're very interested in going there next.
I think my question is on the opposite end of the spectrum of his, because I was wondering if the more your patients practice thinking the language, does it make it even easier for them? Because when you're an athlete, you can practice moves and then you show improvement in real life with your motors, with your muscles.
Yeah, I think we've seen a little bit of that with, it depends on the person, but the person at UC Davis that I showed at the end, they did improve. They doubled their speed. I think they started at around 30 words per minute, and now they're 60 plus words per minute. So they do get better.
That was a great talk. I'm interested in hearing about if there's any, or your thoughts on making this more of a portable practice. So it sounds like maybe UC Davis was able to do this with their patient using it 8 hours a day.
Yeah, but at home if they're connected to the system, and it's not
Exactly, with reducing risk of infection. I don't know, could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is clearly just a research setup for, it's not fully implanted, has the percutaneous things, and then it has to be connected to computers and things which are not mobile. And so that's super important. But unfortunately, no company has made such a device yet. There's many that are close. Neuralink is an obvious example. If you've seen their stuff, and there's other companies, but nobody's given us that technology yet. So this is kind of the research grade stuff that we're building the foundation with.
Just out of curiosity, can you envision that in the future it might be possible to do this with surface recording of any type?
You mean totally non-invasively?
Yeah.
I personally think no, just given the history of what that technology has been able to show. I think just the signal to noise ratios are much, much lower because you're averaging over millions of neurons, and the information really is highly, highly variable from neuron to neuron. So even two neurons very close to each other can have completely different type pieces of information. And when you average over many of them, you kill a lot of the signal. And what we've seen through the history of the field is that you really have to get good performance, get things accurate, you have to have some implanted device.
Hi, really interesting technology. Thank you for sharing. A lot of people with ALS these days are voice banking. So what is the future of this, trying to maybe pair it up so that they're hearing their own natural voice? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a natural thing that should happen. Yeah.
I think that was fantastic. So what a great session. So thank you very much.
Well, yeah, thank you, everyone.